Under the scorching sun of colonial New Spain, in a dusty plaza where hope seemed as scarce as water in the dry season, a tragedy was about to unfold that would forever mark the souls of those present. The year was 1680, and the small settlement of Valle de los Pinos struggled to survive in the harsh landscape of what is now northern Mexico. Adobe houses lined the dirt streets, their red-tiled roofs baking under the relentless heat, while the ancient church bell tower stood as a silent witness to both faith and despair. Isabella Mendoza stood motionless on a makeshift wooden platform in the center of the plaza. At 26 years old, she appeared much older, worn down by grief and hardship. Her black mourning dress, though carefully mended, could not hide the dignity that still radiated from her bearing. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, revealing a face marked by sorrow but not yet broken by it. Around her neck hung a simple wooden cross, the only possession she had left from her beloved husband, who had died in a logging accident 3 months prior. The auctioneer's voice cut through the thick air like a blade. "Here we have Isabella Mendoza, widow of the late carpenter Miguel Mendoza, 26 years of age, healthy, capable of household duties, unable to bear children, but suitable for domestic service." The words stung like salt in an open wound. Isabella's inability to conceive had been the source of whispered gossip and pitying glances throughout her 7-year marriage, but now it was being announced to the entire settlement as if it were merchandise information. The crowd gathered around the platform was a mix of settlers, traders, and opportunists. Some looked uncomfortable with the proceedings, shifting their weight from foot to foot and avoiding eye contact with the woman being sold. Others examined her with the cold calculation of those evaluating livestock. Isabella kept her gaze fixed on a point just above the crowd's heads, refusing to meet their stares, maintaining what little dignity she could in this moment of ultimate humiliation. Her late husband's debts had accumulated faster than anticipated. The sawmill where he worked had refused to pay compensation for his death, claiming it was due to his own carelessness. Without income and facing mounting creditors, Isabella had watched helplessly as her small home and belongings were seized. The local magistrate, a corrupt man more interested in quick solutions than justice, had declared that she herself must be sold to satisfy the remaining debts. 5 pesos, called out a gruff voice from the crowd. The bidder was a tobacco merchant known for his harsh treatment of servants. 8 pesos, countered another man, a cattle rancher whose previous workers had fled under mysterious circumstances. Isabella felt her stomach lurch with each bid, each reduction of her humanity to a monetary figure. She closed her eyes and tried to remember Miguel's voice, the way he used to hold her after another month passed without the blessing of a child, whispering that she was enough, that their love was complete as it was. It was then that a deep, clear voice cut through the auction noise. 50 pesos. The plaza fell silent. Even the children stopped their games to stare. Such an amount was unheard of for this type of transaction. The crowd turned to see who had made such an extraordinary bid. Diego Herrera stood at the edge of the gathering, tall and solid as the pine trees he felled for a living. His weathered hands rested at his sides, and his dark eyes held a mixture of determination and something else, perhaps compassion. He was known throughout Valle de los Pinos as a fair man, a widower himself who had lost his wife to fever 2 years earlier, leaving him to raise their 3 young children alone. Diego had not come to the plaza with the intention of participating in this shameful spectacle. He had been passing through on his way to deliver lumber to the mission when he heard the commotion. What he saw made his blood run cold. A woman, clearly devastated but trying to maintain her dignity, being sold like chattel. Something in her bearing, in the way she held herself despite her circumstances, reminded him of his own late wife's strength. The auctioneer, stunned by the unexpected bid, looked around hopefully for a counter-offer. When none came, he quickly declared the sale complete before anyone could reconsider. Sold to Diego Herrera for 50 pesos. Isabella's knees nearly buckled with relief and terror combined. She'd been spared from the tobacco merchant and the cruel rancher, but what did she know of this lumberjack? What would he expect from her? The stories she had heard of purchase servants were not encouraging. Diego approached the platform with measured steps. When he reached Isabella, he removed his wide-brimmed hat and spoke in a voice low enough that only she could hear. "Senora Mendoza, you have nothing to fear from me. I have children who need a woman's care, and you need a home. Perhaps we can help each other." Isabella looked into his eyes for the first time and saw no cruelty there, no possessive gleam. Instead, she saw the weariness of a man carrying too much responsibility and the kindness of someone who understood suffering. She nodded slightly, not trusting her voice to remain steady. The journey to Diego's home took them through winding mountain paths where towering pines filtered the harsh sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. The wagon wheels creaked rhythmically as they climbed higher into the hills, away from the settlement and its prying eyes. Diego sat beside her on the driver's bench, maintaining a respectful distance while occasionally pointing out landmarks or commenting on the weather. "My children," he said as they rounded a bend that revealed a clearing ahead, "have been without a mother's presence for too long. My oldest, Carmen, is only 12, but has been trying to care for her younger brothers. It is too much responsibility for one so young." Isabella studied his profile as he spoke. There was genuine concern in his voice, love for his children evident in every word. "How old are the boys?" she asked quietly. "Rafael is 9, and little Jose is 6. They are good children, but—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "They miss having someone to tend their hurts, to sing to them at night, to make our house feel like a home again." The house that came into view was larger than Isabella had expected, built of sturdy pine logs with a stone foundation. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and smoke curled invitingly from the chimney. It spoke of prosperity earned through hard work rather than inherited wealth. Gardens flanked the sides of the house, though they showed signs of neglect. Another task that had fallen by the wayside in a household without a woman's touch. 3 children emerged from the house as the wagon approached. Carmen, dark-haired and serious beyond her years, held the hand of little Jose, whose eyes were wide with curiosity. Rafael hung back slightly, old enough to understand that this moment would change their lives, but uncertain whether the change would be for better or worse. Diego helped Isabella down from the wagon with gentle courtesy. "Children," he said, his voice carrying both authority and warmth. "This is Senora Isabella. She will be living with us now, helping to care for our home." Carmen stepped forward, her chin raised with a mix of pride and protectiveness. At 12, she had been forced to grow up quickly, taking on responsibilities that should have been shared. Isabella could see the girl was studying her, evaluating whether this stranger would be friend or threat to their family's delicate balance. "Can you cook?" Carmen asked bluntly, her directness catching Isabella off guard. "Carmen," Diego chided gently, but Isabella held up a hand. "It is a fair question," Isabella said, addressing the girl directly. "Yes, I can cook. I can also sew, tend gardens, and help with lessons if you need them. But most importantly, I hope we can become friends." Little Jose tugged on his father's sleeve. "Papa, will she tell us stories?" Diego's expression softened as he ruffled his youngest son's hair. "Perhaps if you ask her nicely." That first evening, Isabella moved through the house with quiet efficiency, assessing what needed to be done. The children had done their best, but their efforts showed in crooked seams on mended clothes, burned spots on cooking pots, and a general air of organized chaos. She made no criticisms, asked no questions about previous arrangements. Instead, she simply began to restore order with gentle hands and patient dedication. Dinner was a quiet affair, with the children stealing glances at their new housekeeper while trying to maintain normal conversation. Isabella served them simply prepared meat and vegetables, fresh bread, and milk from their cow. It was plain food, but prepared with care and attention they had missed. After the meal, as the children helped clear the table, Jose approached Isabella with a book clutched in his small hands. "Senora Isabella, would you read to us? Carmen tries, but she gets too tired after working all day." Isabella glanced at Diego, who nodded encouragingly. She settled into a chair by the fireplace with Jose on one side and Rafael cautiously taking a seat on the other. Carmen remained standing, arms crossed, still maintaining her protective distance. The book contained simple tales of adventure and moral instruction, the kind written to both entertain and educate young minds. Isabella's voice was soft but clear as she read, unconsciously adding dramatic inflection to dialogue and adjusting her pace to build suspense. Before long, even Carmen had drifted closer, drawn in despite her determination to remain aloof. When the story ended, Jose yawned widely and leaned against Isabella's arm. "That was better than when Carmen reads," he announced with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Jose!" Carmen protested, her cheeks flushing. "What he means," Isabella said diplomatically, "is that different people have different strengths. Carmen, I can see you have been doing the work of 3 people. That takes great strength and love for your family." The girl's rigid posture softened slightly at the acknowledgement. For the first time since their mother's death, someone had recognized her sacrifices rather than simply expecting them. As the weeks passed, Isabella found her place in the household rhythm. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast and tend to the animals. She mended clothes by lamplight after the children were asleep. She transformed the neglected gardens into neat rows of vegetables and herbs. Most importantly, she began to restore the sense of home that had been lost when Diego's wife died. The children's response to her presence was gradual but unmistakable. Rafael, initially suspicious of any change to their established routines, began seeking her out for help with his reading. Jose attached himself to her side whenever possible, chattering constantly about his discoveries and adventures. Even Carmen slowly began to relax her guard, allowing Isabella to take on responsibilities the girl had been shouldering alone. Diego watched these transformations with gratitude and growing respect for the woman who had come into their lives under such difficult circumstances. He had expected competence and was receiving that, but he was also witnessing something he had not dared hope for. His children were beginning to heal from their mother's loss. The first real test came when Jose fell ill with a fever. Isabella sat by his bedside for 3 days and nights, applying cool cloths to his forehead, coaxing him to drink broth, and singing lullabies her own mother had taught her years ago. When the fever finally broke, the little boy looked up at her with complete trust and whispered, "Thank you, Mama Isabella." The word hung in the air like a benediction. Carmen, who had been helping tend her brother, looked startled at Jose's casual use of the maternal title. Rafael, bringing fresh water from the well, paused in the doorway. Diego, just returning from work, stopped completely. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes, but managed to smile. "Rest now, little one. You are going to be fine." Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Diego found Isabella on the porch, staring up at the star-filled sky. "He called you Mama," he said quietly, taking a seat in the chair beside her. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope that does not trouble you." Diego was silent for a long moment, considering his words carefully. Their mother was a good woman, Isabel. She loved them deeply, and they loved her. But she has been gone 2 years now, and children need a mother's love to grow properly. Isabella turned to look at him, surprised by the use of her familiar name rather than the formal address he had maintained. "I would never try to replace their mother's memory, Diego, but if they will allow it, I would be honored to love them as my own." "The honor would be mine," he replied. "You have brought life back to this house, Isabella. You have given my children something I could not give them alone, joy." From that night forward, the boundaries between employer and servant, between necessity and affection, began to blur. Isabella was no longer simply the woman Diego had purchased to care for his household. She was becoming part of their family, woven into their daily lives with threads of genuine caring and mutual respect. The transformation was not without challenges. Carmen, now 13, struggled with allowing another woman to assume maternal authority. She had been the woman of the house for so long that stepping back felt like losing her identity. Isabella recognized the girl's conflict and made sure to consult her on household decisions, acknowledging her experience and maintaining her dignity. Raphael, at 10, tested boundaries with the careful calculation of a child unsure of his place in a changing family structure. Isabella met his challenges with patient consistency, never harsh, but never yielding on matters of safety or respect. Gradually, he came to understand that her authority came from love rather than mere power. Jose, the youngest, adapted most easily. At 7, he was old enough to remember his birth mother, but young enough to embrace a new maternal figure without conflict. His easy acceptance helped his older siblings adjust to Isabella's presence in their lives. The people of Valle de los Pinos watched these developments with varying degrees of approval and suspicion. Some praised Diego for finding a practical solution to his household needs, while giving a destitute woman a chance at a new life. Others whispered about the propriety of the arrangement, questioning whether a purchased woman could be truly trusted with children's welfare. Father Miguel, the elderly priest who served the settlement, paid a visit to the Herrera household several months after Isabella's arrival. He found a clean, orderly home where children laughed and played, where gardens flourished, and where respect and affection were evident in every interaction. "I hear the children call you Mother," he said to Isabella, as they sat in the kitchen sharing coffee and fresh bread. "Yes, Father," she replied calmly. "It happened naturally. I did not encourage or discourage it." The priest studied her face, reading the genuine love there. "And how do you feel about this development?" Isabella was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I lost the ability to bear children, Father, but I never lost the desire to love them. God has given me 3 beautiful souls to nurture. I consider it a blessing, not a burden." Father Miguel nodded slowly. "Diego is a good man, but he needs more than a housekeeper. His children need more than care. They need love, stability, the kind of home that only comes when adults commit themselves fully to each other and to the family they are building together." Isabella understood the priest's meaning, but she also understood the delicacy of her position. "I am grateful for the home I have been given, Father. I ask for nothing more than the opportunity to continue serving this family." The priest's visit marked a turning point in community perception. When the spiritual leader of Valle de los Pinos endorsed the arrangement, others began to see it in a different light. Isabella was no longer viewed as simply a purchased servant, but as a woman who had found her calling in caring for children who needed her. As autumn arrived and the first frost touched the mountain peaks, Isabella realized she had been living with the Herrera family for nearly a year. The anniversary of her auction day approached, and with it came unexpected emotions. She had gained so much: a home, purpose, children to love, but the circumstances of her arrival still carried shame. It was Carmen who addressed the elephant in the room with her characteristic directness. "Isabella, were you very afraid when Papa bought you at the auction?" They were working together in the kitchen, preparing vegetables for the evening meal. Raphael and Jose played outside in the fading light, while Diego finished his work in the barn. It was a moment of female solidarity, older girl to woman, that Isabella recognized as important. "Yes," Isabella answered honestly. "I was terrified. I did not know what kind of man your father was, or what he would expect of me. I had heard terrible stories about women who were sold." "But Papa is not terrible," Carmen said fiercely, her loyalty to her father absolute. "No, he is not," Isabella agreed. "He is a good man who has shown me nothing but kindness and respect. But I did not know that then. I only knew I was at the mercy of strangers." Carmen continued chopping onions, processing this information. Were you angry? About being sold like a cow or a sack of grain? Isabella paused in her work, considering how to answer. Yes, I was angry. Angry at the circumstances that led to it, angry at a system that allows such things, angry at my own helplessness. But anger alone changes nothing. I had to choose whether to remain bitter or to find purpose in my new situation. And you chose purpose, Carmen observed. I chose to love your family, and I have been rewarded beyond anything I could have imagined. Your father gave me a home when I had none. You children have given me a reason to wake up each morning with joy in my heart. I am no longer the woman who was sold at auction. I am Isabella Herrera in all but name, mother to 3 beautiful children, keeper of a happy home. Carmen looked up with sudden intensity. Is that what you want? To be Isabella Herrera, not just in feeling, but in truth? The question caught Isabella off guard. She had not allowed herself to consider such possibilities, trained by circumstances to accept what was given, rather than hope for what might be desired. That is not my decision to make, Carmen. That would depend on your father's wishes. Have you asked him what his wishes are? It is not my place to ask such things. Carmen set down her knife and turned to face Isabella fully. You are not a servant anymore, Isabella. You stopped being a servant months ago. You are part of our family. Family members talk to each other about important things. That evening, after the children were settled for the night, Isabella found the courage to approach Diego with the question that had been growing in her heart for months. He was sitting by the fire, carving a toy horse for José's upcoming birthday, the wood shavings curling away from his knife in delicate spirals. Diego, she began, then paused, unsure how to continue. He looked up from his work, noting the seriousness in her tone. What troubles you, Isabella? Nothing troubles me, exactly, but Carmen asked me something today that I find I cannot answer. Diego set aside his carving and gave her his full attention. What did she ask? Isabella took a deep breath, gathering her courage. She asked if I wanted to be Isabella Herrera, not just in feeling but in name, in truth. Diego's expression grew very still. And what did you tell her? I told her it was not my decision to make, that it would depend on your wishes. They looked at each other across the firelit room, 2 people who had found unexpected companionship in difficult circumstances, 2 wounded souls who had helped each other heal. Diego stood and moved closer to her chair. Isabella, he said carefully, when I bought your contract at that auction, I thought I was solving a practical problem. I needed help with my children and home. You needed protection and a place to live. It seemed like a fair exchange. Isabella's heart sank slightly. The arrangement had been practical, nothing more. But somewhere along the way, Diego continued, it stopped being practical and started being something else entirely. You have become essential to our happiness, to mine as well as the children's. I wake up grateful that you are here. I go to sleep thankful for another day of watching you love my children as your own. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his calloused ones. I've been afraid to speak of this because of how we began. I did not want you to feel obligated, to think you owed me anything beyond what we agreed. But if you are willing, if your heart is truly free to choose, then yes, I would be honored to have you as my wife in truth, not just in the eyes of my children. Isabella felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. My heart has been free for months, Diego. Free to love you, free to love this family, free to choose to stay, not because I must, but because I want to with everything in me. Their wedding was simple, held in the small chapel of Valle de los Pinos, with Father Miguel officiating. Carmen wore her best dress and proudly carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Rafael and José stood as witnesses, beaming with pride at their role in the ceremony. The congregation was small, but genuinely happy for the couple who had found love in unexpected circumstances. Isabella wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Diego had bought for her in the settlement. It was not white, as tradition might dictate for a first bride, but a soft blue that complemented her dark hair and eyes. She carried no shame about her past, no apology for the path that had led her to this moment. She was a woman who had survived adversity and found love on the other side. When Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, the children cheered enthusiastically. As Diego kissed his new bride, little Jose announced loudly, "Now she really is our mama." The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, the sound of a family celebrating its completion. In the years that followed, Isabella and Diego built a life together that exemplified the best possibilities of love born from unlikely circumstances. Their home became known throughout the region for its hospitality, its warmth, and the obvious happiness of its inhabitants. Travelers would comment on the laughter that could be heard from within, the well-tended gardens, the children who were clearly thriving under loving care. Carmen grew into a confident young woman who credited Isabella with teaching her that strength could coexist with gentleness, that leadership could be exercised with love rather than force. She eventually married a young teacher from the settlement and remained close to her family, bringing her own children to visit their beloved grandmother, Isabella. Rafael became a skilled craftsman like his father, but he also pursued education under Isabella's encouragement. He could read and write better than most men in the region, skills that served him well as he eventually established his own lumber business. He named his first daughter Isabella in honor of the woman who had shaped his childhood with love and wisdom. Jose, the baby who had first called Isabella Mama, grew up with no memory of a time when she had not been his mother. He became a gentle, thoughtful man who credited Isabella with teaching him that love was not limited by blood relations but could be chosen and cultivated. He remained devoted to both his parents throughout their lives. Diego and Isabella were blessed with a long marriage filled with mutual respect, deep affection, and shared purpose. They never had biological children together, but Isabella's inability to conceive had long since ceased to be a source of pain. She had become mother to 3 wonderful children and grandmother to many more. Her legacy was written in the lives she had touched, the love she had given, the family she had helped create. As she aged, Isabella would sometimes think back to that terrible day in the plaza when she stood on the auction block, believing her life was over. She would remember the despair, the humiliation, the fear of what lay ahead. Then she would look around at her home, hear the voices of her grown children and their children, feel Diego's hand in hers after decades of marriage, and marvel at the mysterious ways that sorrow could be transformed into joy. The story of Isabella and Diego became something of a legend in Valle de los Pinos, passed down through generations as an example of how love could bloom in the most unlikely soil. It was a reminder that dignity could not be bought or sold, that worth was not determined by circumstances, and that family was created not by blood alone, but by choice, commitment, and daily acts of love. Isabella lived to see the settlement grow into a proper town, to witness changes she could never have imagined on that auction day so many years ago. But through all the changes, her own truth remained constant. She was a woman who had been loved well and had loved well in return. She was proof that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the most broken circumstances, that love could indeed conquer the greatest adversities. On her deathbed, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Isabella whispered to Diego, "I was lost when you found me. I was nothing when you made me everything. Thank you for seeing what I could become rather than what I was." Diego, now an old man himself, but still strong in his devotion, held her hand and replied, "You were never nothing, my love. You were always everything. I just provided the place where you could bloom." And bloom she had, transforming not only her own life, but touching countless others with her example of resilience, love, and the power of choosing hope over despair. The woman who had once stood on an auction block as chattel became the heart of a family, the center of a community's respect, and the proof that every person, no matter how broken they might seem, carries within them the seeds of remarkable transformation. The legacy of Isabella Herrera lived on long after her death, in the children she had raised, the community she had served, and the enduring truth that love, when given freely and received with gratitude, has the power to heal the deepest wounds and create the most beautiful stories from the most unlikely beginnings. Her story reminds us that dignity is not something that can be taken from us by others, but rather something we maintain through our choices and actions. It teaches us that family is not defined solely by blood relations, but by the love we choose to give and receive. Most importantly, it shows us that no matter how dark our circumstances might seem, there is always the possibility of redemption, of love, of a new beginning that can transform our understanding of what our lives can become. In a world that often values people based on their utility or circumstances, Isabella's story stands as a testament to the inherent worth of every human being and the transformative power of love that sees beyond surface appearances to the heart that lies within. It is a story of hope triumphant over despair, of love conquering fear, and of the beautiful truth that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our most difficult challenges. The dusty plaza where Isabella once stood in shame became, in memory, the birthplace of one of the most beautiful love stories the region had ever known. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all, that there is no circumstance so dire, no beginning so humble or painful, that it cannot be transformed by the power of human love, dignity, and the courage to believe in second chances. Years later, when Valle de los Pinos had grown from a struggling settlement into a prosperous town, the plaza was paved with stones and adorned with a fountain. But those who remembered the old days would sometimes pause at the spot where the auction block once stood, not in shame or sorrow, but in wonder at how God works through the most mysterious paths to bring about his greatest blessings. The house that Diego built with his own hands became a landmark of sorts. Travelers passing through would be directed there not only for food and lodging, but for the reputation it had gained as a place where miracles of the heart were common knowledge. Isabella, now in her final years, would sit on the expanded porch with her needlework, watching her great-grandchildren play in the same garden where she had once planted her first seeds of hope. The children of Valle de los Pinos grew up hearing the story of Señora Isabella, though it was told differently depending on who was doing the telling. The older women would emphasize the virtues of patience and acceptance, while the men focused on Diego's decisive action in saving a woman in need. The children themselves understood it more simply. It was a story about how love could grow in the most unexpected places, like wildflowers sprouting through cracks in stone. Father Miguel, now ancient and bent with age but still sharp of mind, would often reflect on the divine providence he had witnessed in this family's formation. In his Sunday sermons, he would speak of how God uses human suffering not as punishment, but as preparation for greater purpose. He would remind his congregation that Isabella's childlessness, which had once seemed like a curse, had prepared her heart to love adopted children with a depth that perhaps only those who have known loss can achieve. The lumber business that Diego had built through decades of honest work became a family enterprise that employed half the young men in the region. Carmen's husband managed the financial aspects, while Rafael oversaw the actual timber operations. Jose, with his gentle nature and Isabella's influence, became the one who dealt with customers and suppliers, his natural diplomacy making him invaluable in negotiations. But it was the women of the family who carried on Isabella's most important legacy. Carmen taught her daughters that a woman's worth was not measured by her ability to bear children, but by her capacity to love and nurture whatever souls God placed in her care. When one of her daughters struggled with her own infertility, Carmen was able to share her mother's story as proof that motherhood came in many forms. The community's attitude toward unconventional families had gradually shifted, largely due to the example set by the Herreras. Other widowers began to consider marriages of practical convenience that might blossom into genuine affection. Women who had been dismissed as unmarriageable due to age or circumstances found new hope in Isabella's story. The rigid social expectations that had once governed the settlement gave way to a more flexible understanding of how families could be formed and love could be found. As Isabella aged, her wisdom became legendary throughout the region. Women would travel from distant settlements to seek her advice on everything from difficult marriages to rebellious children to questions of faith and purpose. She never set herself up as an oracle or claimed special knowledge, but her responses were always grounded in hard-won experience and deep compassion. Mija, she would tell young women struggling with their circumstances, I learned that we cannot choose what happens to us, but we can always choose how we respond. Your response is where your power lies, not in changing the past or controlling the future, but in deciding who you will be in this moment. To mothers worried about their children's futures, she would say, love them fiercely, but do not love them fearfully. The love that holds too tightly out of fear creates the very problems it seeks to prevent. Trust that the foundation you build in their hearts will guide them even when they are beyond your reach. When couples came to her with marriage troubles, her advice was always practical and spiritual in equal measure. Marriage is not a feeling that comes and goes with the seasons, she would counsel. It is a choice you make every morning when you wake up, a decision to see the good in this person who shares your life, even when they are difficult to love that day. The final years of Isabella's life were marked by a serene contentment that impressed everyone who knew her. She had lived long enough to see her great-grandchildren begin to have children of their own, creating a family tree that spread like the branches of the massive oak that now shaded her garden. On warm afternoons, she could often be found surrounded by several generations, telling stories or teaching the little ones to identify medicinal herbs. Diego, despite being several years older, remained remarkably vigorous well into his 70s. He credited Isabella's cooking and care for his continued health, but those who knew them best understood that it was the deep happiness of their marriage that had sustained them both. They still held hands when they walked together, still sought each other's counsel on important decisions, still lit up when the other entered the room. Their love story had become a source of hope for the entire region. In a world where marriages were often arranged for financial or social advantage, where women's choices were severely limited, and where second chances were rare, Isabella and Diego proved that genuine love and happiness were possible even under the most unlikely circumstances. When traveling merchants or government officials visited Valle de los Pini and remarked on the unusual prosperity and contentment of the community, locals would inevitably point to the Herrera family as an example of the values that guided their town. Here was a family built not on blood ties or social convention, but on mutual respect, shared purpose, and unconditional love. Here was proof that the most broken beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. The wooden cross that Isabella had worn around her neck on that terrible auction day had been carefully preserved and passed down through the family. It became a symbol not of suffering, but of faith rewarded, of endurance leading to blessing. Each of her daughters and daughters-in-law had worn it on their wedding days, and it would continue to be passed down through generations as a reminder of where their family's story began and how far love had carried them. In her final days, Isabella would often sit quietly in her favorite chair by the window, watching the life that flowed around her with profound gratitude. She had begun her journey to this place as chattel, a woman with no choices and no hope. She was ending it as the beloved matriarch of a large and loving family, a woman whose influence would ripple through generations yet to come. When visitors would express amazement at the transformation her life had undergone, Isabella would shake her head gently and correct them. "I was not transformed," she would say. "I was revealed. Diego did not change me into something I was not. He simply gave me the space and safety to become who I had always been underneath the circumstances that tried to define me." This distinction was important to her because it spoke to her deepest belief about human nature, that every person, no matter how broken they might appear, carried within them the seeds of something beautiful. The tragedy was not that people were fundamentally flawed, but that so many never found the conditions necessary for those seeds to sprout and grow. The night Isabella died, she passed peacefully in her sleep, with Diego's hand in hers, and the sounds of her family's quiet conversation drifting from the next room. She had lived to see her 90th birthday, and remarkable age for that time and place. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people from throughout the region, all of whom had been touched by her kindness, her wisdom, or her example. Father Miguel, now assisted by a younger priest due to his advanced age, delivered a homily that captured the essence of Isabella's remarkable life. He spoke of how she had embodied the Christian virtues of faith, hope, and charity, not through grand gestures, but through daily choices to love, to forgive, to nurture, and to see the good in every person she encountered. "Isabella Herrera," he said, his aged voice still carrying the authority of decades in service to God and community, showed us that sainthood is not about perfection, but about perseverance. She was not a woman without troubles, but a woman who met her troubles with grace. She was not a woman without sorrow, but a woman who transformed her sorrows into compassion for others. She was not a woman born to privilege, but a woman who created abundance from whatever she was given. Diego lived 3 more years after Isabella's death, cared for lovingly by his children and grandchildren. He never remarried, saying that he had been blessed with one great love in his lifetime, and that was more than many men ever received. He spent his remaining years teaching his grandsons the skills of forestry and carpentry, sharing with them not only the practical knowledge they would need to continue the family business, but the values that would guide them in treating their workers fairly and managing their resources responsibly. When Diego died, he was buried beside Isabella in the cemetery overlooking the valley they had called home for so many years. Their grave marker was simple stone, carved with their names, dates, and a single inscription that captured the essence of their shared life. They chose love. The house they had filled with laughter and warmth became a family gathering place for generations to come. Every year, on the anniversary of their wedding, the extended Herrera family would gather there to share a meal and remember the couple whose love had made all their lives possible. Children who had never known Isabella or Diego personally grew up hearing their story, understanding that they were part of something larger than themselves, connected to a legacy of love that transcended individual lifespans. As the years passed and Valle de los Pines continued to grow and change, the story of Isabella and Diego became woven into the cultural fabric of the region. It was told and retold, adapted and embellished, but the core truth remained constant, that love could triumph over the most difficult circumstances, that dignity could not be bought or sold, and that family was created not by accident of birth, but by conscious choice and daily acts of devotion. The dusty plaza where it all began was eventually renamed Plaza Isabella in honor of the woman who had taught the community so much about resilience, compassion, and the transformative power of love. A small bronze plaque marked the spot where the auction block once stood, bearing the inscription, "Here ended one story and began another. Here despair gave birth to hope. Here love conquered fear." And so, the legend lived on, inspiring new generations to believe in the possibility of redemption, to look beyond surface appearances to the heart within, and to remember that no matter how dark the night might seem, dawn always comes to those with courage to wait for it and wisdom to recognize it when it arrives. But the story of Isabella Herrera included struggles that tested her resolve and revealed her true character. During her second year with the family, a severe drought struck the region. Wells dried up, crops withered, and Diego's lumber business came to a halt as rivers disappeared. During this crisis, some old prejudices against Isabella resurfaced. Whispered conversations suggested that perhaps the community was being punished for allowing such an unconventional union. These murmurings reached Isabella through Carmen, who reported them with indignation. "Perhaps they are right," Isabella said quietly, as she rationed their remaining flour. "Perhaps I have brought some curse upon your family." Carmen was shocked by this moment of self-doubt. "You cannot believe such nonsense, Isabella. You have been nothing but a blessing to us." Isabella smiled sadly. "When hardship comes, people look for someone to blame. It is easier than accepting that sometimes suffering simply exists without reason we can understand. This crisis might have destroyed a weaker woman, but it became the crucible where Isabella's true strength was refined. She chose to respond to suspicion with greater service, to doubt with increased faith. When José became ill with fever during the drought, Isabella never left his bedside. She gave him her own water ration, cooling his forehead while her own lips cracked from thirst. When the fever broke, José whispered, "Mama, I knew you would not let me die." Diego, watching his wife's sacrificial care, felt his love deepen beyond anything he had thought possible. This was not duty, but the fierce protection of a mother defending her child. The drought finally broke with heavy rains that caused flooding, but the community that emerged was different. Hardship had revealed character, and Isabella had proven herself beyond doubt. Those who had questioned her now sought her counsel. As Valle de los Pinos recovered from the drought, Isabella's role in the community evolved. She became a respected leader, mediating disputes and coordinating relief efforts. The crisis had deepened the bond between Isabella and Diego, proving their love through adversity. The children were also changed by hardship. Carmen learned that leadership meant service. Rafael understood that character was revealed in difficult times, and José absorbed that love required sacrifice. As prosperity returned, the Herrera family found themselves stronger than before. Isabella had discovered reserves of strength she never knew she possessed, emerging with unshakable confidence in her identity as wife, mother, and valued community member. The years brought new joys as the children married and started families. Carmen wed the young teacher and had twins who filled the house with laughter. Rafael expanded the lumber business, bringing prosperity that allowed them to help others. José assisted Father Miguel with teaching, his gentle nature suited to working with children. Isabella embraced her role as grandmother, teaching the little ones to read, identify plants, and cook traditional recipes. Most importantly, she taught them that love was not limited by blood, that family was created by choice and commitment. Her granddaughter Maria particularly treasured their conversations. When the girl struggled with adolescent insecurities, Isabella took her to their garden. "Beauty comes in many forms," she said, showing her roses blooming in rocky soil. "Love comes not to those who demand it, but to those who give it freely." This wisdom shaped Maria's entire life perspective. As Isabella entered her 70s, health problems reminded everyone of her mortality. A persistent cough forced her to reduce activities, though she insisted on cooking Sunday dinners. Diego convinced her to accept help with household duties she had managed for decades. During this period, Isabella began writing her life stories in a wooden box Diego carved for her. These pages revealed a woman of deep spiritual insight, who had wrestled with questions of faith and emerged with hard-won wisdom about forgiveness, seeing good in difficult circumstances, and choosing hope over bitterness. Her influence extended beyond family to the broader community. When a new school was established, Isabella served on the board despite her limited formal education. Her practical wisdom about treating all children with dignity made the school a model for other settlements. Isabella's relationship with Diego remained strong throughout their later years. They developed their own private language of gestures, could communicate with glances across crowded rooms, and still sought each other's company above all others. During one of their evening conversations, Isabella spoke of her approaching death with characteristic acceptance. She was 87, increasingly tired, and sensed her time was ending. "I am not afraid," she told Diego as they watched great-grandchildren play in the garden. "I have lived a full life, loved deeply, and been loved in return. I have seen more joy than I ever dared hope for when I stood on that auction block." Diego struggled with the prospect of life without her. "I do not know how to be without you." Isabella took his hand. "You will not be without me. Every lesson you taught our children carries part of me. Every kindness they show reflects what we built together." Isabella used her final 3 years to have individual conversations with each child and grandchild, sharing memories and ensuring each understood their unique value. With Carmen, she discussed motherhood and the balance between protection and allowing growth. With Rafael, she spoke about responsibility and using prosperity to benefit others. With Jose, she discussed faith and the courage to follow one's calling. Her final illness came suddenly. The family gathered around her bedside during her peaceful transition, surrounded by love and secure in her legacy's continuation. The funeral procession that accompanied Isabella's body to the cemetery on the hill overlooking Valle de los Pin was the largest the settlement had ever seen. Representatives came from neighboring communities, former students traveled from distant cities, and families she had helped through various crises made the journey to pay their respects. The service itself, conducted by Father Miguel with assistance from 2 younger priests, was a celebration of a life well lived rather than a somber mourning of loss. Diego's eulogy for his beloved wife was simple but profound, capturing in a few carefully chosen words the essence of the woman who had transformed not just his life, but the lives of countless others. "Isabella came to us with nothing," he said, his voice steady despite his grief. "But she gave us everything. She showed us that love is not something we fall into by accident, but something we choose to build with our daily actions. She proved that family is not just about blood relations, but about the commitment to care for one another through all of life's seasons." He paused, looking out over the crowd that had gathered to honor his wife's memory. She would not want us to remember her as perfect, because she was not. She would want us to remember her as faithful, faithful to her duties, faithful to her family, faithful to her community, and faithful to the God who brought good from her suffering and joy from her sorrow. The impact of Isabella's life continued to ripple outward long after her death. Her written reflections were eventually compiled and privately published by one of her grandsons, who had become a printer, distributed throughout the region as a testament to the wisdom that could emerge from even the most humble circumstances. The school where she had served continued to operate according to principles she had helped establish, producing generation after generation of well-educated, morally grounded citizens. The Plaza Isabella, dedicated in her honor 5 years after her death, became a gathering place where community decisions were made with the same spirit of inclusive democracy she had modeled in her interactions with others. The bronze plaque that marked the former location of the auction block became a pilgrimage site of sorts for women facing their own difficult circumstances, a reminder that no situation was so desperate that it could not be transformed by courage and love. But perhaps the most lasting tribute to Isabella's memory was found in the countless acts of kindness performed by people who had been influenced by her example. Children who had learned generosity at her knee grew up to be adults who cared for their elderly neighbors. Women who had received her counsel became wise advisors to the next generation. Men who had witnessed Diego's devotion to her learned to treasure their own wives with deeper appreciation. The love story that had begun with such unpromising circumstances became a touchstone for the community's understanding of what marriage and family could be at their best. Young couples facing difficulties would be reminded of Diego and Isabella's example, encouraged to see challenges as opportunities for growth rather than reasons for despair. Families dealing with adoption or step relationships found hope in the way Isabella had become a true mother to children not born to her. As the years passed and Valle de los Pines grew from a small settlement into a proper city, the story of Isabella and Diego became woven into the fabric of local culture. Street names commemorated their legacy: Calle de la Esperanza, Plaza Isabella, Avenida Herrera. The lumber company, founded by Diego, eventually became one of the region's largest employers, still operated by his descendants, according to the ethical principles he and Isabella had established. The house where they had raised their family was preserved as a historical site, maintained by their descendants as a testament to the power of love to transform circumstances. Visitors could walk through rooms where crucial conversations had taken place, see the garden where Isabella had first planted seeds, both literal and metaphorical, and feel the presence of lives well lived in service to others. School children throughout the region grew up learning about Isabella Herrera as an example of resilience and grace under pressure. Her story was taught not as a fairy tale with an impossibly perfect ending, but as a realistic account of how ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things through persistence, faith, and commitment to something larger than themselves. The love story that had begun with such difficult circumstances became a beacon of hope for generations to come, proving that dignity cannot be bought or sold, that worth is not determined by circumstances, and that the most beautiful chapters of life can emerge from the most challenging beginnings. In the end, Isabella's legacy was written not in grand monuments or official records, but in the countless lives touched by her example of grace under pressure, love without conditions, and faith that persisted through every trial. Her story reminded all who heard it that every person, regardless of their circumstances, carries within them the potential for transformation and the capacity to create something beautiful from whatever materials life provides. The woman who had once stood on an auction block as property became proof that the human spirit, when nurtured by love and sustained by hope, can rise above any circumstance to achieve something truly extraordinary. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all, that love, when it is true and freely given, has the power to transform not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone we touch along the way.